Well, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Sometimes with quilting, you just change one little aspect of a quilt block and you get a whole different other block. And this week's block is a perfect example of that. Let's get started. So a couple of weeks ago, we did the crumb star. Now I kind of got to thinking, let's do another block that's similar to this, but let's change out this center block. So instead of crumbs, this week we're going to do a 4-patch. Now the idea behind this block is that the layout or the design of it can be changed just by simply swapping out something. So in this case, we're going to do a different center block here. Basically, if you do flying geese units as a star point, you can basically put any block that you want to in here and it'll still be a star shape. So this week, we're doing a 4-patch star. So to make this block, you're gonna need 4 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles, and we will be using these to make the flying geese units, which will be the star points. Then you're gonna need a variety of 2.5 inch squares, 12 in total, and these will be used to make, again, the flying geese units and also the 4-patch. Then you're going to need 4 2.5 inch squares of a background print, and these will be the cornerstones of the block. So to make the flying geese units, you're going to take your 2.5 inch squares, and this time I'm just going to finger press diagonally. Now you can iron this, you can draw a line diagonally from corner to corner. The choice is yours, but I'm just going to finger press a line right there diagonally from corner to corner. Okay. And how we are going to sew this is, I'll take my 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangle. We're going to place this in the corner, and we're going to sew from the bottom left corner to the center. Then we're going to flip this back, and we'll take the second square, or second 2.5 inch square, going from the bottom right corner to the center, or you can sew from the center to the bottom right corner. Then we'll stitch that back. We'll have our flying geese units. So let's get these flying geese units sewn. I'm going to actually make these star points very, very scrappy. So I was planning, or thought about doing a flying geese unit like this where the 2.5 inch squares kind of match. But then I said, no, let's make it a little bit more interesting. And let's just do it totally scrappy. So I'm going to just put this, okay, again, now we're going to sew the other side to it. So here's a little tip. You see what I'm doing here is I actually got 2 blocks and I kind of got it staggered. And what I'm doing is I'm lining up the seam here a 1/4 inch on the ruler, or put the 1/4 inch line here on the seam on this unit as well as on this unit. And I'm just going to cut, I am just going to trim both of them off at the same time. Okay, so just a little tip that you can do that. Just line it up. When you line it up, just make sure that the seams here are kind of in one continuous line. And when you put your ruler back on there, just double check that that 1/4 inch line is right there on the seam. Doesn't have to be exact. It can be a little bit off because you already got your seam sewn here. So you just basically trimmed off all the flying geese units. And then these can go in my crumb bin. You know, there's different methods to how to make a flying geese unit. This is the method that works for me because I have a lot of pre-cuts where I pre-cut 4.5 or 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles, as well as a number of 2.5 inch squares. So doing this method of flying geese, or constructing flying geese, I should say, is rather easy for me. But I do know that there's other methods where you can do the 2 at a time flying geese method, or what is it called? The 4 at a time flying geese method, where you cut out a big square and then you cut out smaller squares, line it up, sew it diagonally. What's your favorite method of making flying geese units? Put a comment down below and let me know how you do your flying geese units. You don't have to follow the same way or same technique that I do. This is just how it works for me. So we got our flying geese units sewn. Let's get the 4-patch sewn together. Okay, so I got 4 2.5 inch squares here. And I'm going to sew these 2 together, and then we'll sew these 2 together, then we'll sew the 2 units together. You know, the 4-patch block is actually one of those basic blocks where it's usually one of the first ones that you will learn. And although the block is, I don't want to say simple, but the concept of how to assemble a 4-patch block is actually very important as a beginning quilter, because it gives you the idea as to how to assemble other quilt blocks. Okay, and this was actually one of the very, very basic blocks that I first learned how to do. For me, it was kind of like a foundation block where as soon as I learned how to do it, then I could actually apply that to other blocks. What do I mean by that? Here we have our 4-patch block, and I'm just finger pressing the seam allowance to one side. We sewed the 2 squares together into rows. Now we're going to sew the rows together. And we're going to nest the seam here. Since I press it to one side, it can easily nest. What if, instead of just basic 2.5 inch squares, what if we actually use something like a half square triangle? Here I have 2 half square triangles. Now, although we call them half square triangles, the shape of each of these is actually just a square. If I sew it together like that and attach it to yet 2 other squares, well, you basically get a pinwheel. But the assembly of a pinwheel is just basically the same concept of a 4-patch, but instead of just plain squares, you're sewing together half square triangles. And how you assemble it together is basically the same concept, where you sew one square to the other and create a row. Then you sew the row together. And hopefully, in the case of a pinwheel, you do have that center point where you want to make sure that all the half square triangles are kind of coming together. Or the idea that I'm trying to say to you is, if you learn how to sew a 4-patch like this, then when you get to other blocks like pinwheel or even whatever block, I mean, as long as it's 4 squares, you shouldn't have any problem, or the concept of assembling the block is still the same. You have 4 squares, you sew one square to each other to make one row, then you sew the next row, and then you sew the rows together. We need a 4-patch song. 1 square, 2 square, 3 squares together, 4 squares, now you got a 4-patch forever. 1 square, 2 square, 3 squares together, 4 squares, now you got a 4-patch forever. Yeah, not bad. I need a second verse though. Seems a little incomplete. Well, it's the best I could do on the fly. 1 square, 2 square, 3 squares together, 4 squares, now you got a 4-patch forever. That just sounds like one of those irritating songs that just keeps going on forever. You know, like the one that goes, the wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, round and round. Oh, I hate that song. 1 square, 2 square, 3 squares together, 4 squares, now you got a 4 patch forever. And that's gonna be irritating, and I'm gonna be singing that all night. Probably in my dreams too. That better not happen. 1 square, 2 square, 3 square together. So let's get this 4 patch done, and I'll show you how I deal with this center seam here. Okay, so here we have our 4 patch block. This center seam here, you got all 4 layers coming together in this center point here. So there's a lot of bulk right there in the center. And so what I tend to do with these is, if I just press the seam allowance over to one side, when it comes to actually quilting this quilt top or putting the quilt together, if your needle has to go through this center point, you're going through 8 layers of fabric altogether. And so sometimes, yeah, some machines don't like that. So in order to deal with the bulk here in the center, here's what I tend to do. I can either press the seam allowance open, which is sometimes what some quilters like to do. But other quilters, well, they don't like to have the seam open like that. So what you can do is what is called spin the seam, in which I'm gonna get, this is Jane. I don't know where Jack is. I still can't find him. And I'm gonna take a few of the stitches out here, or rip them out. Oh, maybe I'll do it from this side. It'll be easier. So I'm gonna rip that. Or I'm just gonna pick a few of the stitches, and I'm only picking the stitches that are within this seam allowance here. So I'm not picking any of these stitches here. I'm gonna press this seam allowance to the left and press this bottom seam allowance to the right. And what happens here in the center is that you're gonna kind of come up with like a mini 4 patch there. Okay, if you see that mini 4 patch, then you did it right. And I'm gonna just kind of pick a few of the stitches so that it'll lie flat there. Okay. And what this does is it actually distributes the seam allowance a little bit more evenly throughout, so that you're not getting one spot with all 8 layers. Okay. So it does take a little time. It might take a little practice to do, but if you can do this, well, you'll have an easier time when it comes to the quilting, or if you have a long armor, they'll appreciate the fact that you did this. Now again, I'm not saying that you have to spin the seam or you have to press the seams open. You could very well just press the seam to the side. The choice is really up to you. But I do find that when I press the seam open, or if I have that center point, or if I spin that center seam allowance, yeah, the block will lay much flatter. So let's get this whole block laid out, and let's get this block sewn together. here is my 4-patch star block. Now the block should measure about 8.5 inches. Again, give or take your 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I like how this one came out. Now, it's a little different technique than the quilt that you see behind me. The star points here, these were made of half square triangles, whereas in the star points here, we did flying geese. Hey, if you don't like doing flying geese, just use half square triangles to make your star points. Again, you can take this 4-patch block and replace it with something else, like the crumb block, which is what we did a couple weeks ago. Or, I wonder what a pinwheel would look like in here. That might be interesting to just try it out. Give it a try. If you don't want to do the 4-patch, just replace it with something else. Pinwheel, a square and a square, name a block. Choice is yours. It's your quilt and you can do whatever you want with it. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed making a 4-patch star with me, and post a picture of the block that you created, whether it's a 4-patch or something else. Now, until next time, go out and create something. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications on when I upload the next video. Put a comment down below saying what you liked or maybe even what you didn't like. And join the Facebook discussion group at Treasure Heart Creations. You can post pictures of the blocks that you created, or just scroll through and gather inspiration from other Treasure Heart Creation Group members. And from time to time, there are giveaways exclusively for Treasure Heart Creation Group members. So use the link in the description box below to sign up. If you're on Instagram, post pictures of the blocks that you're working on using the hashtag THC5252. Well, that's it for now. Now go out and create something.